we are going to be looking for some mushrooms. And I'm also going to be adding in an additional kind of like guideline of what I know about mycology, which is the study of mushrooms, and just really how cool mushrooms are, you know, and take some time to sit down and talk about what I know and what I think is so interesting about mushrooms, while also adding in some cool footage of mushrooms that I find while I'm going to be looking around throughout my woods. So those of you that like my mushroom hunt videos, I think you guys are going to like this video. But if not and you're watching, thank you, and I hope you can chill out, sit back and relax and learn a little bit about mushrooms. As with me, you know, every time I come out here, I learn something new about the mushrooms, you know, be it how abundant they are, or where they grow in my woods, or what varieties are more common and stuff like that. But yeah, I got some talking points here in my pocket that I thought were the most relevant things to talk about and the most sort of important things to talk about. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. But in the meantime, I'm going to get to hunting so I can get the footage that I'm going to provide for you guys. So let's do that. So I suppose I'll sit down and get comfy while we sit here and talk about mushrooms a little bit. But yeah, the first point I got here is Maine mushrooms and when they grow. So yeah, Maine offers quite a diverse variety of mushrooms to work with and to hunt for. I have yet to identify, but let alone even witness, the extent of variety of mushrooms in my state here, Maine. So yeah, if you're into mushrooms and hunting for mushrooms or eating mushrooms or whatever it is, there's a plentiful and diverse variety of mushrooms out here in the Maine woods, you know. And when they grow, mushrooms grow year-round. Different types of mushrooms will grow year-round, but I've noticed, and I've done some research on it of what other people say, but I've noticed that mushrooms grow most abundantly during fall, during the fall season, right now, like end of August, getting into September, October area, November, you know. Those are the times when it's damp and getting darker quicker, and it allows for mushrooms to grow much better. And I also feel like, this is another personal opinion, but I feel like mushrooms grow like kind of like oak trees every other year type thing. Like, I'm pretty sure oak trees are every 4 years they drop seeds for new trees, but mushrooms, it seems like, you know, 1 year they're not abundant, and then the next year they're everywhere, and then the next year they're not abundant, and then the next year they're everywhere. And you know, I've seen this a couple times now, a few years, and yeah, it seems like mushrooms grow abundantly 1 year and then not so much the next year, you know. And I don't know if that's factual, but it does kind of seem like that. And I actually know that's the case with the mushroom known as reishi mushrooms. That is the case, where they only grow once every other year. And I kind of started to just suppose that for other varieties of mushrooms as well. I freaking love the feel of fall, dude. Some people say they like summer, but honestly, like, this right now is my favorite time of year, when it's starting to cool down, you know. It's just, I mean, temperature-wise, it's more tolerable, but it's just got this vibe to it, you know, that I've had since I was a kid, and I really like it. Second talking point I got here is the anatomy of mushrooms. So, the anatomy of mushrooms is very complex and very diverse, really. I mean, once you get to know a certain type of anatomy of mushrooms, you'll be able to see it throughout the woods or wherever you're hunting. But every now and then you come across a type of mushroom that is just weird, you know? And mushrooms really, from what I've seen in my woods, this is where I hunt the most, there's stemmed mushrooms, stem and cap mushrooms, and there's shelf mushrooms, and then there's little mass growing here and there, kind of akin to mold type mushrooms that'll grow in little clusters here and there. But yeah, as far as the anatomy of mushrooms go, and as far as what I know, you know, for stem and cap mushrooms, you got the stem and the cap, and there's all these characteristics that go into the structure of the cap, like convex and concave, being how like wavy edged, stuff like that, and if it's like coming up or dipping down in. Then you got the gills on the bottom, but on other mushrooms, rather than having gills, you have tons of pores all over the bottom of the mushroom, and these mushrooms are known as polypore mushrooms, which translates to many pores. Spores, which reside for gilled mushrooms up in the crevices of the gills, and for polypores in all those little holes. Spores are the reproductive cells of mushrooms, and at a certain maturity of the mushroom, the spores drop down out of the gills or pores or whatever it is. And we'll talk about that a little later, but because that's really friggin' interesting and deserves its own talking point. But yeah, the spores are the reproductive points of the mushroom. Oh yeah. So the vulva. The vulva is the bottom of the mushroom. If you kind of, you know, some mushrooms it's exposed, and even yet on some mushrooms like Amanita varieties, the vulva is swollen, and that's actually a way of determining Amanita mushrooms is by that swollen vulva. But really the vulva is just the base or the bulb of the mushroom, where it kind of turns over from growing into a mushroom and producing mycelium. And that's the next thing we have here is mycelium. So if you've ever turned over a log or dug in the ground at all, or you know, something like that, and you see these like web-like structures, and it's not spider webs and it's not roots, but it kind of looks like a mix of the two type thing, that is mycelium. And those are, I guess you could say, the roots of the mushrooms, you know. And as a mass, it's known as mycelium, but the individual threads are known as hyphae, you know. It would be like naming the individual roots of your plants, which I actually don't know the name of. But yeah, hyphae is the individual threads in the mass of mycelium. Pores, yep. And the last anatomical term I have here is the veil/skirt. And this is only found on certain varieties of mushrooms, but probably like 3/4 of the way up, almost to the top, maybe in the middle sometimes, there'll be this little ring. There'll be this little, and sometimes it'll be broken and fallen apart, but you'll see this little ring. And when the mushrooms are young, that ring is actually connected up to the cap, or that is in its button stage, that is developing, and eventually it tears. That veil or skirt tears, and as the mushroom grows up, it runs down the length of the stem. But yeah, that's an anatomical part of the mushroom. And like I said, it's only present on certain varieties of mushrooms. And just to mention, I'm not that good on varieties of mushrooms. I know a handful of mushrooms that I've found throughout my woods here, but I can't, you know, I wouldn't feel comfortable telling somebody what they can eat and what they shouldn't eat type thing. I think mushrooms are really interesting and really weird, fascinating, and just a cool field of interest, you know, field of study. But that's it that I have for the anatomy of mushrooms. And like I said, every now and then with what I just listed, yeah, you'll be able to structuralize some of the mushrooms that you find out in the woods. But every now and then you're going to come across a mushroom that is just weird. And it just is like, how is that even an organism? You know what I mean? But generally speaking, the mushroom usually consists of some sort of fruiting body that in some way or other drops spores. That can be seen as the most simple way to look at the anatomy of mushrooms. So here's the really cool part, how they reproduce. Some of you might not have considered it or whatever, or some of you might think that mushrooms produce seeds and drop them similar to plants. I mean, in a way type thing, but the way mushrooms reproduce is actually very interesting. It's so the spores I was talking about earlier and the mycelium that I was talking about earlier that I was kind of holding off on because it's so just unique. When a mushroom reaches maturity to a certain ripeness, it begins to drop spores. And these spores are microscopic little specks that are completely airborne. So they don't just drop, you know, like apple drops near the tree or whatever it is. No, that shit goes for miles, and you know, it could go anywhere really. And those spores are not just they're not just like copies of that mushroom. What they are is each individual spore or speck is either male or female. And what happens is these spores land wherever they may and are blown all about. And in time, once the spores germinate through a certain environment, which is usually the fall type environment, at least where I'm at, the spores, be it male and female, they begin to grow hyphae, which eventually turns into the mycelium. And the hyphae is going out, and when a male and female spore shoot out hyphae that reach each other, when they reach each other, a mushroom grows. A fruiting body is able to grow, and that's how the mushrooms are able to develop all over the place, is all these threads, like root-like threads that are growing throughout the ground of different genetics of mushrooms and different male and female spores of those mushrooms, all running around, germinating, dying off, trying to reach the opposing gender. That's how those mushrooms can pop up, and will pop up intensely in different areas and stuff. But yeah, man, that shit's a trip. Just trying to think of some other things relative to the reproduction of mushrooms that's really fascinating. I mean, this is cool to think about with plants and seed-bearing plants and whatnot. They have to drop their seeds, which grow and then reproduce above the ground if and when they've grown successfully. But when you see a mushroom, that's already a successfully that's already a successful mycelial reproduction of that mushroom, because the fact that the mushroom grew is because the spores successfully met underground in their massive mycelium, which is really cool. People are too lazy. I'm too lazy at least. See how I said that? People are too lazy. No, I'm too lazy. I was just thinking, I need to come out here more. I need to hang out here more. But then when I'm at the house, it's like I don't want to suit up and come out here. But it's so worth it. It's so relaxing to be out here, you know? The next talking point I got here is the visual beauty and weirdness of mushrooms. So yeah, you go out into the woods or go on a walk somewhere, and you look around and you see all the plants, and you don't really differentiate the plants from each other because they're kind of similar. They all grow and have these stems and branches and foliage, and some give off these smells, and then the leaves drop. You know, they all have this sort of cycle to them. But mushrooms are weird. Mushrooms are this completely different thing. They don't really represent a plant or, you know, even a mold to some extent. It doesn't look similar to those things. It's its own little creation, and you know, you talk about the flesh of it. Most plants are very, you know, woody or soft and stemmy and full of water. I mean, don't get me wrong, mushrooms are like 95% water, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, if you ever feel a mushroom, just that, the creation of what that is, you know, in my mind, tells me that that is something, that is a completely different material. And I'd even go to say that the material that makes up a mushroom, you know, is a concoction of everything that's broken down in that area over centuries, over thousands of years, and has created the flesh of those mushrooms, you know? That could be what's going on. But yeah, mushrooms look very different than plants and animals, especially, you know. But then when you look at the mushrooms specifically, amongst themselves, they're so diverse, and they're so exotic, and they're so weird. And you know, you got your stem and cap mushrooms that start off in this little button stage, and then where everything's short and stocky and plump, and then it all extends out, and the stem gets long, and the cap turns into, from this button into this flat, big, round UFO shaped looking thing. And then you got your other mushrooms, like I'm looking at right over here. The boletes is what I'm thinking of. The mushrooms that have that concave, I think it is, where it comes down rather than the flat and coming up, or, you know, having a completely hollow center type thing where it wraps down around. No, it comes down, you know, and has this big thick bulb bulging beneath the cap. Um, then you got shelf mushrooms, or bracket mushrooms as they're sometimes called. They grow on cut stumps, which is actually what I got this tripod that's recording me right now on. They grow on stumps, they grow on the sides of trees, the sides of fallen logs and stuff like that. Those look really far out. Those aren't a stem and cap mushroom, you know, those are just this little growth, you know. And then you got stuff like witch's butter, the mold looking stuff, the little goos and jellies and gobs of weirdness that grow here and there that are the fruiting body of that variety of mushroom. I think of the ghost pipe mushroom, which I'll probably be able to find while I'm looking throughout the woods. It looks kind of like a plant. That one kind of looks like a plant, but a weird plant, and you can tell it's not a plant type thing. But yeah, stuff like that. The appearance of mushrooms is very peculiar, very interesting. Many of them don't even look similar amongst themselves, kind of like what I was just saying. If you don't mind, real quick, I'm gonna get up and make sure this video is still recording. All right, cool. Next point I got here is how mycelium communicates. Now, I highly suggest, before I even get into this, I highly suggest watching the Netflix documentary Fantastic Fungi, because they, you know, obviously describe this phenomenon tiers better than I'm about to. But the mycelial network that is down below this very forest floor right now is mind-blowing when you begin to learn about it and fathom it. Like I was talking about, the spores that drop and are very microscopic and blow all over the place, this creates the ability for mycelium to be growing wherever it wants, really, wherever it's able to properly germinate. So we got mycelium growing everywhere. I've actually heard before that the forest floors are actually made up of about 75% mycelium. Now that's really far out to consider. All this mycelium is searching underground, and it's looking for that opposing thread, you know what I mean? And it's able to go for miles and miles and miles in the same spot, not just in a line, but in the same condensed area, until you got this friggin' brick of mycelial mass, you know? And just the abundance of the threads communicating down below prior to them being even apparent above ground as a grown thing, you know, it's just really crazy that they got their own thing going on. And you know, experiments have been done with certain types of fungi. I think it was the witch's butter. I don't know, like this mold, this orange slime fungus, and they put it in a maze. They put it in like a map of a certain city, and the mycelium, the fungus grew through that maze in a quicker and more efficient manner than any routes that us humans have made to get through that city ever. since that city's ever been a thing, the fungus was able to find a quicker and more efficient way. And that's something in its own right to talk about, is the intelligence of mycelium, or mushrooms, or fungus. Like I said, they got their own game going on. They're doing their own thing, and I got some points that I'm going to get into here in a minute, just about how they're utilizing nature to do what they do. And honestly, a major part of nature is because of what these fungi are doing. So yeah, the next point I got here is saprophytes and parasites. You may be more familiar with that second term there, parasite or parasitic, but saprophyte and parasite refers to the two main types of mushrooms and how they grow. So with a parasite, you can assume that what it does is it parasitizes a living organism and leaches out its nutrients and essentially kills that living organism and trades off its nutrients so that that parasitic fungus can get to its point of reproduction. And parasitic variety of mushrooms are sometimes looked at as bad and dangerous because they can break down forests and stuff, or certain gardens and certain crops that you're trying to grow. Those are parasitic fungi that, botrytis, gray mold, which is what farmers deal with relentlessly, that is a parasitic fungi. But then you got your saprophytic fungi, your saprophytic mushrooms. And these little guys, what they do, they live off of living things. Oh, wait, no. No, saprophytic mushrooms live off of dead things. Saprophytic mushrooms live off of things that are dead. And they absorb the nutrients that is left from an already decaying source. Anytime you see fallen logs or stuff growing on stumps, or even just, like on a pile of wood or something, or really anywhere on the forest floor, there's a chance it's probably a saprophytic mushroom that's growing off of a dead source, and then you have mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi are fungi that create a symbiotic relationship with living plants. That was what I was confusing for saprophytic fungi a moment ago. But yeah, mycorrhizal fungi create, basically what they do is they attach as spores to the roots of plants and trees and all the different stuff throughout the environment, and they grow their mycelium, their hyphae threads, off of the roots of that plant or tree. And they do their thing as a mushroom. They create their mass of mycelium, searching for the opposing threads so they can reproduce. But in the meantime, with the way they're working and the way they're doing their thing, that mycorrhizal fungi is literally acting as an extension of that plant's roots. All that mycelium is literally an extension of that plant's roots. It's feeding that plant. The plant brings down sugars and passes it off to the mycelium to keep it living, and the mycelium in turn the mycorrhizae absorbs a different field of nutrients at a better rate and a better scale than the plant's roots could on its own. And it absorbs those nutrients and delivers it to the plant. So they have this synergistic, symbiotic relationship going on. And, you know, all this stuff considered, it's really cool. This is where you can begin to see the fungal intelligence, really. How these fungi are utilizing nature to do what they do. And I guess you could argue that for every organism and whatever in nature, but fungi are doing this really interesting thing. They've found a way to live on, you know, considering the saprophytes, they've found a way to live on things that are already dead. They don't harm life. They don't harm living things. They go after things that are already dead. And you can consider when an animal dies in the woods and begins to rot and decompose, aside from the maggots and the insects that get at it, what causes that rotting process is fungi, saprophytic fungi that are beginning to eat that flesh and bone and tissue away, even fur, you know. But yeah, the saprophytes, they do their thing without harming any other living thing. And unless it's growing in to an invasive extent, which I don't really think mushrooms do, it's not a problem. The saprophytes aren't a problem, and they're actually very beneficial because they break everything down. They rapidly speed up the process of breaking down and decomposing things. And with a saprophytic fungi or mushroom present, you can make compost, and the ecosystem breaks itself down into a rich, fertile form much quicker. And the mycorrhizal fungi, they live symbiotically with life. They don't hurt life, they don't invade on life, they share and trade and bond with life, you know. And the mycorrhizae is doing this different job for the roots because the roots are doing this different job for the mycorrhizae, and they're working together, you know, and they got these different qualities to them of themselves that they're able to work together. And plants thrive in the presence of mycorrhizal fungi. But then you got your, you know, doom and gloom. You always got to have the bad. You know, it's yin and yang here, folks. You wouldn't know the bad if it wasn't for the good, vice versa. You got your parasitic mushrooms. These are the mushrooms that grow and develop by stealing from already living things. They steal the nutrients and suck and absorb the life out of living things. A relatively easy way to live with a very vigorous environment or forest or wherever it is these parasitic mushrooms are thriving. But yeah, parasitic mushrooms, you can look at them as your enemies. You can look at them as the dangerous fungi throughout the woods, you know, the ones that attack your crops, the ones that kill your trees that have been there since you were a kid, the ones that ravage forests and stuff. And you know, those would probably be the dangerous, invasive fungi. But really, you know, when I hear all this stuff, when I talk about all this stuff, sort of like how in Hinduism, all these gods are actually metaphors for human traits and human thoughts and beliefs and emotions and whatnot. It's as if the mushrooms, the fungi world, is a metaphor of how we are and how we communicate and work with each other and how everything works, you know? The fungal world is demonstrating the different ways of gaining the different ways of getting somewhere and being successful, you know, and you can denote it and relate it to all these different things. And I just think that's really cool, that the mushrooms can be seen as an example of how life works, how life does what it does. The three main forms, you know, stealing, trading, and taking from what is no longer given, aka dead, you know what I mean? Mushroom toxicity. So on a very surface level, mushrooms are seen to some people as dangerous and bad and gross. And yeah, they're looked at as these things that, like, don't touch them, definitely don't eat them, you know, don't rub your eyes after touching them, don't taste them, don't mess with them, you know. Some people even believe that psilocybin mushrooms, which are psychedelic mushrooms, that the psychedelic experience caused by those mushrooms is actually food poisoning because those mushrooms are toxic. There's this idea that mushrooms are dangerous. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a wide variety of mushrooms that are toxic. They gotta have a defense mechanism too, you know, and mainly what they do is they can cause paralysis, and they can cause intense abdominal pain, and I've even heard they can cause blindness, and ultimately many of them can even cause death in some way, shape, or form that I don't know about. But no, there are lethal mushrooms out there. But something I've learned, and you can't quote me on this, it's not, I don't know about factual, but you can't die by touching any mushroom. You can touch any mushroom you want and you won't die. And as long as you don't eat the mushroom, or, you know, maybe lick your fingers or whatever, you're gonna be fine. And I don't know about the potency of toxicity of these different mushrooms, but yeah, I suppose licking your fingers or rubbing your eyes wouldn't have a substantial effect either. But like I said, I don't know about the potency of the toxicity, so you can't quote me on that one. But yeah, mushrooms aren't that bad. Mushrooms aren't that bad. Go take a look. They're actually really interesting and intriguing and cool. They're just very different. They're very unique, you know. My next point here is Mycorrhizae, which I already talked about, which is the form of fungi that lives symbiotically with living things. But yeah, Mycorrhizae is very definitely worthy of having its own point, and I think I already made that point kind of clear. So I'll move on. The next point I have here is turning mountains to sand and forest floors to compost. What I meant by that is, I learned this a while ago. Mushroom fungi, actually, is the more proper term for it, are what are responsible for breaking down mountains into grit, into sand that eventually erodes with rain, with runoff, rainwater, down to the beaches, down to the coasts. All that sand you're seeing that didn't just break up on its own. I mean, maybe some stuff broke up from being dry, or some stuff broke up from impact and all that stuff, or water, the water washing over it. But no, a lot of that sand on beaches and just on low sea levels, low ocean levels, or whatever it is, that's there from fungi that have broke down mountains, that have eaten rock. I don't know what type of fungi that is, but it eats rock. It breaks down rock. It grows its mycelium through the rock and essentially displaces the rock and trades it out with itself, which is just like, wow, you know? And yeah, the saprophytes and even the parasites, which kill the living things, and the saprophytes that break down the dead things. Fungi are what are responsible for, I mean, aside from microorganisms and microbes and microbacteria and stuff like that, fungi are what are responsible for breaking down all that matter into what we call leaf litter, you know? If I grab this forest floor right now, all this stuff, that's broken down leaves and branches and wood and, you know, water and guaranteed mycelium and fungi and probably seeds, bugs, all that stuff. It's all broken down, and the fungi are rapidly and steadily eating away at that, breaking it down constantly. If that wasn't happening, I mean, not to mention, nature probably wouldn't even be a thing, but everything would be building up, and it would be all on the insects and the bugs and the rodents to eat and break down everything, you know, and the world would be a mess if it weren't for fungi that naturally break everything down to this beautiful, fine, black gold, as farmers call it, which is really just compost, you know? Compost, that word comes from decomposition, you know, which is what fungi are doing to everything. And I forgot to mention, there's even types of fungi, they eat themselves. They don't eat anything. They eat themselves, guys. They live off of their own supply. There's another metaphor. There's another type of person. It's just crazy, really, the world of fungi and the different symbology in it, and the uniqueness, the weirdness of them. I don't even need to begin to get into the world of psychedelic and psychoactive mushrooms, you know, which I have some videos on. But yeah, fungi are just incredible. Fungi are really incredible things. And it's a joy to come out into the woods, and it's really like getting presents on Christmas when I come across a really nice batch of mushrooms in the woods, or a really, really beautiful, fine, no insect damage specimen of a mushroom, and it's just like, wow, that is so friggin' beautiful. That is so cool, you know what I mean? And yeah, fungi are really cool. Fungi are really cool. If you're looking for something to do, don't really care what it is you're doing, go out into your woods and see how many different types of fungi you can find in the woods. I'm always saying my woods, your woods, and that's just me relating it to my property. But yeah, any woods, anywhere really. Go out and see how much fungi is actually going on, you know? But yeah, guys, that's really it. for this video as far as my talking goes. You know, if you're at this point now, I'm about to go and capture all the footage of the mushrooms that you've been watching throughout this whole video. So I'm about to go and do that and really take some time, chill out, relax, and go get some nice footage of some mushrooms. But if you watch this all the way through, thank you guys so much. Sorry I haven't been making videos recently. But yeah, this is awesome to sit here and just dive headfirst into mycology, Maine mycology. And yeah, if you're interested in mushrooms, let's talk about it, you know? I have an Instagram. I'd love to talk with you guys about anything, you know? But yeah, that's it for this video. Maine mycology, a look into the mushroom world from Northwood Shaman's point of view. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all later.